Okay, good morning. So what we have discussed so far, we had the Mishnah on the Beis that told us about the chiyuv of saying Kriya Shema, and we learned that there are three different opinions as to when one is able to say Kriya Shema Shal Arvis until. Either that is until the end of the first Hashemara, either that is until Chatzos, or that is until Amud Hashachar. And then we discussed additionally, the idea that the Chacham puts various siyagim around that even if the Chacham are saying that there's a mitzvah only until Chatzos, that nevertheless, according to Rabbi Gamliel, that mitzvah would remain for the rest of the evening until the morning. There is, however, a fundamental machlokes as to does the end of the Shema of the Arvis end at the end of the first Hashemar, or do you have the rest of the night, depending on, according to the Sheet of Rebbe Lezer, the idea of saying Shema's during the time of B'Shaklocha, it's when you're going to sleep. And according to Rebbe Gamliel the Chachamim, it's not when you're going to sleep that there's the mitzvah of Shema, but during the time that people are sleeping that there's the mitzvah of Shema. And so at any point in the evening, in theory, one should be able to say the Shema, except that we put a siyag in place that you shouldn't say it later than Chatzos. Then on the Gemara on Daf Beis, Amud Beis, we discussed what ended up being 6 different positions as to when the chiyuv of Shema in the evening starts. We understand that the chiyuv of the evening of Shema started in the Mishnah by saying we ended up adding in 5 additional shitas, and that included the shita of the Shabne Adam Nichnasim Lechol Piton, when the people are coming to coming to eat on Erev Shabbos, and we ended up talking about a shita of the ani nechnas la'achal pita b'melach. We talked about the shita of when people are making kiddush, when kahanim are tevel, and from when people are coming in to be masiv for this seuda. So we ended up with, as we say, 6 different opinions as to when the chiyuv starts to say Shema in the evening, and we pointed out that some of these opinions overlap, things like Rameir saying 2 different things, Rabbi Lezer saying 2 different things, and we have to come up with various answers to explain that. Yesterday, we discussed in the Gemara Daf Gimel, we discussed the idea of the fact that there is 3 Ashmeres. Today we're going to go discuss that further. The idea that there are 3 different Ashmeres in the evening time, and according to Rabbi Lezer, you could have said Tzeis HaKechavim, but the reason we said that the Ashmeres, instead of saying Tzeis, was because we wanted to get across to you that there is signs, there are ways that a person could discern that in fact the Ashmara is happening. And the signs were, for the first Ashmara was the donkeys braying, the second Ashmara the dogs barking, and the third Ashmara the child nursing or the couple talking. And there was a question. We ended up with 2 different opinions, as we mentioned. We're not 100% sure on Machleges of Metzias and the celestial heavens, exactly how this works, I don't know. But the basic idea being, when do these signs happen? According to the Gemara, one of the possibilities is that they happen at the end of the first Hashemara is when the donkeys bray. In the middle of the second Hashemara is when the dogs bark. And at the beginning of the third Hashemara is when the child starts to nurse and the couple is talking. That was one possible option. There was another option which said that all signs happen at the end of the Mishmar. So the end of the first Mishmar is when the donkeys bray. The end of the second Mishmar is when the dogs bark. And the end of the third Hashemara is when the child starts to nurse and the couple is talking. The question became, well, if it is based upon the end of the Hashemara, then why do I need a sign for the end of the third Hashemara? Because the sign is the fact that it's the daytime. On that, we would answer for Rabbi Lezer that it's talking about a situation where somebody's gone in Beveis Afal, he is living in a dark room, and so he doesn't know exactly when that time is to say Shema, so he could use the sign of knowing when the end of the Ashmera is to say to himself, this is now the time that I should be getting up to be able to say the Shema in the morning. And even though Taisa said, doesn't Rabbi Lezer require being Tchilas Lakarti? No, you can rely on the Ashmera sufficiently enough to know that this is the time that I should be getting up. By the time you get up, if you hear that baby's nursing, by the time you're ready, you know it's already going to be the time that you could say the Shema now of the morning. This was the first half of the Gemara that we did yesterday, and then we added in a second bit, and the second bit was talking further about these various Hashmeris, that they are Shatz Rachamim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, as it were, feeling sorry for what he's had to do to Jewish people and put them into the Golas. And then we ended up discussing, as it relates to this, because of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Shai Kari 3 times during the evening, we added in an additional point, and that additional point was that Rabbi Yossi once went to a churva in the churvas of Yerushalayim, and we discussed what happened in the churva. In the churva, he heard that the Baskal was, as it were, also lamenting over the fact that the Jewish people are in exile, and when he came out, he was confronted by Eliyahu Navi, Zachor Latayv. Why were you in this churva? What were you doing in this churva? And we learned out, Rabbi Yossi learned out 3 different lessons, and the 3 lessons were the following: that number 1, you shouldn't be going into the churvas. Number 2, you should be able to be davening on the road, in Shemana Esrei. And number 3, if you're davening on the road Shemana Esrei, you should daven a tefillah ketzar. As we explained to Machlekes Rashi Tosfos, if the tefillah ketzar was Havinenu, or it was the tefillah of Mum Tzarchei Amcha. In the beginning of Tosfos disagrees with Rashi. In the end of Tosfos disagrees with Rashi. And tefillah ketzar in our Gemara at least will mean Havinenu, which is a synopsis of the Shemana Esrei. And then we discussed what is the problem with going into a churva. The problem with going into a churva is chshad, mapilas, and mazikin. Chshad, the idea that somebody's going into a dark room for a reason. So how do you avoid chshad? Obviously, if you're 2 people, you won't have a situation of chshad. Unless it's a situation of 2 people in prutzim, then it would still be chshad. We said, oh, mapilas, how do you avoid mapilas situation? That would be a situation where you have a churva charati. If it's a new churva, then it clearly, part of it obviously was unstable, but and wasn't finished, or perhaps, but clearly the rest of it should be able to remain. And the third possibility of mazikin is understood to not be so applicable if you have 2. Sometimes the mazikin are considered to be shriach in a certain place, and the Gemara went through a back and forth of saying, well, is it possible to knock out one of them and just rely on the other 2? And the Gemara said, well, we can come up with various permutations to ensure that all these 3 reasons are still needed to understand the reasons that one is not supposed to go into a churva. Now we go in the Gemara today on Gimel Amud Beis, starting from the 2 dots. 2 dots on Gimel Amud Beis. Tana Rabbanan. Arba Mishmaris Have Alayos. We have a machlekes. Yesterday we saw that how many Mishmaris are there? Yesterday we saw that there are 3 Mishmaris. That was the sheet of Rabbi Lezer. Today we're going to see it's a machlekes. It's not so simple. Says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan Ar Mishmaris Have Alayos. There are 4 Mishmaris at night. Divrei Rebbe. According to Rebbe, there are 4 different watches in the heavens at night. Rav Nosson Aimer, Shalosh. Rav Nosson disagrees, and he says that there are 3 different mishmaris in the evening. My time is Rav Nosson. What is the reason of Rabbi Nosson? The Chsiv. And Gideon came, was going to fight the Midianites. And this is a very interesting story there in Shoftim. If you look at it, it's a very fantastically interesting story where Gideon has a big army that's mustered to go fight against Midian, and Rabbeinu Shalom tells them, no. That's not the way we like it, right? The pasuk tells in the end of Parashas Vayischanan, "Lo merubchem mikol ha'am chashak Hashem mechem ki atem ha'me'at mikol ha'amim." You're the smallest. Hashem picked us, not the Chinese, because of the fact that it's a bigger kunst to pick us. If you pick the Chinese and they win, there's 1 billion people. Shkoyach. You pick a nation of 10 million, it's a big kunst. So same over here. Hashem doesn't want to get him to go fight with a huge army. He says, no, get rid of the army, a smaller army. So he gets anybody who's afraid, right? A lot of people go home. And Hashem said, no. You still got way too big of an army. And you know what they do the test? The test was they went to the water and they drank from the water. And the people who bent down like a dog, on their knees, that they had to be sent home. They're not allowed into the army. Who are the people allowed to be in the army? The people who cupped their hands into the water and they brought, the Maisa, the famous one, I love this Maisa, the Maisa of the Rebbe and the soup. Right? You want to know my Rebbe is the biggest Rebbe. No, my Rebbe is the biggest. No, you want to know my Rebbe is the biggest Rebbe. How? When he eats, he never puts his head down to the soup. What does it mean? He gets it dirty on his shirt, clearly. No, that I say it as a joke. What happens is that when it comes to the soup, the spoon goes in the soup and it comes to his mouth. He never bent down to the food. So ends up Gideon has 300 men. Hashem says, oh, now you'll destroy them. Right? And this is what the pasuk is talking about. and he comes with 100 men. Rosh Hashmeres at the beginning of the middle Hashmera. What do you mean the beginning of the middle Hashmera? How do you have a middle? You have to have a beginning and an end. So how many mishmaros are there? Rav Nosson said that there are 3 mishmaros. It makes perfect sense what it means when it came to attack in the middle of the Hashmar. And therefore, it makes perfect sense why Rav Nosson would say that there are 3 Hashmaros. The Rebbe mighty chayna. What about Rebbe? What is Rebbe going to do with this pasuk? Rebbe holds that there are 4 Hashmaros. How do you have a middle if you have 4? On that, the Gemara says, "Achas min hatichana shebetichana." It's one of the 2 middle ones. That's what it means. When the pasuk is telling us that Gideon came to fight, Rosh Hashmeres at the beginning of the Hashmeres of the middle Hashmer, it means the middle. There are 2 middles. You have a middle child syndrome, right? If you have an odd number of kids, you could have middle child syndrome. One of you have 4 kids. I have a family member, not in my family, kind of I have 9. This is the middle child, but I have a family member that came from a family where there was only 4 children. So they said, "No, I'm the middle child. How can you be the middle child?" Because I'm the middle child. Right? That's a different mindset. But how could you have a situation where you have a middle? Psychologically, it works, but Rebbe's explaining you could have 2 middles, and so therefore that's what the pasuk is referring to in relation to Gidon. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Nosson, what are you telling me that there are 2 middles? It doesn't say that it's one of the 2 middles. It's tichayna. There's a middle, and that means therefore that there are only 3. Tichayna says the Gemara. My time of the Rebbe. So Rebbe disagrees. Rebbe said that there are 4 Hashmaros. So obviously, he wasn't learning out that the idea that there are 4 Hashmaros from this pasuk, because Rosh Hashmaros at tichayna would mean mashma that there are 3 more clearly. So where did Rebbe get the idea that there are 4? Amar Rabbi Zrika, Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Shuban Levi. Kosav Echad Amar Chatzis Lala Akim Lahedis Lachal Amish B'Teitzes Kach. They have a pasuk in Tehillim that tells us that David HaMelech says about himself that I am getting up. Chatzis Lala Akim Lahedis Lachal Amish B'Teitzes Kach. I'm getting up to be made, right, to give you praise on the wondrous, right, your righteous laws. Because of Echad Amar Kidu Einai Hashmeres. And another pasuk tells us that what that we get up. And David HaMelech says about himself that I get up my eyes. I'm waking up Ashmeres, which is mashma what? He's getting up 2 Ashmeres. He's getting up early 2 Ashmeres. Says Rabbi, what does it mean? How do you have a situation where David HaMelech says he's getting up by Chatzos and he's getting up 2 Ashmeres? Arba Mishmaris Havilal. The way you can figure that out is because of the fact that there are 4 Ashmaris in the night, right? If the night is 12 hours and there are 4 Ashmaris in the night, so you have the first 3 hours from 6 to 12 is 2 Ashmaris, and then from 12 to 6 in the morning is another 2 Ashmaris. So what David HaMelech saying? I got up at Chatzos. So when am I getting up? I'm getting up 2 Ashmaris early because it's still the Ashmar from 12 to 3 and from 3 to 6. So therefore, perfect. It comes out that there are 4 Ashmaris. Havilal. Rav Nosson Savar Lach Rabbi Yeshua. Rav Nosson says that there are 3 Ashmaris a night. So if it means that there are 3 Ashmaris a night, I mean the Ashmaris are from 6 to 10, 10 to 2, and 2 to 6. So if somebody's getting up at 12 at Chatzos, what does it mean he's getting up 2 Ashmaris? He's not. He's getting up only a Ashmar and a half. So what would Rav Nosson do with this? Rav Nosson says it goes like Rabbi Yeshua. The Tanan we're going to have later on in the morning. That test Rabbi Yeshua. We're talking there about Kriyash Mashal Shachar. Somebody said that you have until the 3rd hour. Why is it until you have until the 3 hours into the day? Because that's when the Bnei Melachim get up. Where the Jewish people are like Bnei Melachim. So therefore, you have until the 3rd hour in the day to say Shema. Says the Gemara that what Rav Nosson is trying to explain. The question that Rabbi would have from this passage of Kidmei Ashmars and he got up at Chatzos, the way to answer it is as follows. You have, says the Gemara, Shis Delelio, V'tarta Diyamama, Havelu Shtei Mishmars. Basically, since a Mishmar, according to Rabbi Nosson, is 4 hours, right? 4, 8, 12. You have 3. The night Mishmar is 12 hours, right? I'm sorry, the night is 12 hours, and you have 3 Mishmars. Each is 4 hours. So the way you get to 8 hours is you have 6 left in the night. You have from 12 to 6 in the morning, and then you have 2 in the day until when the kings get up, as Rashi points out. Rashi says that when do the kings get up? They get up in the beginning of the 3rd hour. That's the Rashi in Rabbi Nosson. Rashi says, they get up in the beginning of the 3rd hour. So since they get up at that time, then you end up with a situation, you have 8 hours. If the kings normally get up at 8 and David HaMelech get up at 12, that means there's 8 hours, so you could divide them into 2 mishmaris. I don't know if they're mishmaris in the day the same way they are in the night, but what that would effectively mean is you still get 2 mishmaris early, and that's what David HaMelech is saying, Kidmu Einai Ashmaris. That is one answer of the Gemara. And then the Gemara gives a second answer of Ashiyam Mishmar Paga, not Mishmaris Karlu. What's your problem? Why do you have to start worrying about bringing a Bishua in the morning, 2 hours? No. So 12 to 6 is two different Ashmaras. One is the middle Mishmar, one is the second and the last Mishmar. So therefore, you can also call that Ashmaras, that David Melch got up two Ashmaras. That's sufficient. Either way, what it comes out from this Gemara is that what we had seen in Rabbi Lezer says that there's the Chiyuv, the mitzvah to say Kriya Shema ends at the end of the first Ashmara. We have then further explained the Rabbi Lezer Shita is actually there were three Ashmaras, which would have a practical nafkamina. According to Shita Rabbi Lezer, when are you able to say Kriya Shema Shel Arvis until? Are you able to say it until 3 hours, until 4 hours? So that would be a practical machlokes. Rabbi Lezer holds that there's only three Ashmaras in the night. He holds Isa Ashmara is 4 hours. So he holds like the opinion that we now find out is also the opinion of Nasan. But we now know that there is a machlokes. Again, is this a machlokes to Matthias? How does it work? If there are four Ashmaras, does that mean that there are now four signs? The Gemara is not going to delve into, is there a fourth sign now for Rabbi, for according to the Shita of Rebbe? Rebbe holds that there are four Shmaras Sari Alayla. So we know we have the dogs, and we have the donkeys, and we have the kids, but shouldn't we have now a fourth? That we will have to leave for another time. Continues the Gemara.
You're well with the one full set of the signs at the end of the first one and then in the middle, because that one, the middle one, in the middle of the middle will be in the middle of the two.
Yeah.
And then the last one will be at the beginning, whatever. I'm saying if it's four Ashmaras and three signs, so the first one will be at the end of the first Ashmara, and the second will be in the middle of the middle two, and then the last one will be at the beginning of the.
Right, because the second one that's in the middle of the at 12, right, for the Man Amar that's going to be holding that there are four Ashmaras, then that's perfect, right? Because you have a sign there for the 12 o'clock, and then it would be able to get him a sign as well. But according to that Man Amar, there at 3 would be too early for the sign of the last Mishmar. Right? But the last Mishmar would have to be, according to that first answer to the Gemara in Gimel, that it's at the beginning of the last Mishmar, it would still be according, if you divide it up into 3, right? So you have 6 until 10, 10 until 2, and then so it wouldn't work out. According to if you hold that there are 4, the second right, it would end up being 3. So I'm not sure. In any event, continues the Gemara as follows. Says the Gemara, where are we? We are up to the following. The Gemara says, the Amar Rebbe Zrika Amar of Amis, right? So many times in Shas, we find that the Gemara has a substantive point that it made, and then it wants to continue on that point, and it continues going, even though it wasn't necessarily relevant to the topic before. We also find many times in Shas where we brought down a certain Tana, Amira, and then we want to bring down additional sayings, memories from this Tana or Amira, even though they're not necessarily on point with what we have been discussing. And that is the case in point over here. Over here, we already had a shalshelas of talking about Reb Zika, of Ami, Amr Shimon Levi, right? As we know, we are supposed to always say as much as possible, Nevar Mishem Amran. So we continue going now with additional members of Rabbi Zrika, the name of Rabbi Ami, the name of Rabbi Shimon Levi. So what did he say? Ein Amr b'fnei Ameis el Devar Shel Meis. You do not say in front of a person who is no longer with us, except for things that are relevant to the mace. The more that now has the machlekes, what does that mean? Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana lo yaman ela b'divrei Torah. That's only talking about divrei Torah. They're not allowed to say in front of a mace. Ava mila da'alma less lamba. But you're allowed to say mila da'alma. If it's not related to Torah, you want to talk about other things, that is not an issue. Vika da'amir Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana lo yaman ela afilu b'divrei Torah. Rather the reverse. You're not able to talk in front of the mace, even divrei Torah. But of course, you're not allowed to say mila da'alma, random things in front of a mace. You're not allowed to say either. The halacha, it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. If you look in the Taisus here, and Taisus ain't I remember Taisus brings down from the Rif in the name of Rabbi Goyen, like the first approach in our Gemara. That namely, it is usher to talk divrei Torah in front of the mace, but mila da'alma you are able to say in front of the mace. And this is how it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch as well. What is the issue with saying divrei Torah in front of a mace? The issue is what's known as loeg l'rosh, cheref oiseu, right? If you're going to be talking divrei Torah in front of the mace, it's like you're making fun of him, you're mocking him. He doesn't have divrei Torah anymore, and you're making him feel bad at his current situation. Cheref oiseu, it's like you're being mecharef magad if you're blaspheming the Rebbeinu Shalom. This is actually brought down halacha, right? Loeg l'rosh is brought down as a halacha. The Gemara tells us later on, we're going to see in Daf Yud Ches, that a person is not able to go into a base like forest carrying a sefer Torah, wearing tefillin, right? You're not allowed to do that. It's brought down halacha, 100%. You're not allowed to do that. This always comes up with most people don't go into basic first wearing the tefillin or carrying separate terrors. It's not really a problem nowadays. But the one problem that does come up is brought down in Shulchan Aruch twice, both in Aruch Chaim Tav Gimel, as well in Yardeh Ancient Samach Zayin. The Shulchan Aruch talks about tzitzis. What is the story with tzitzis? And the Shulchan Aruch makes a distinction between the tzitzis of their days and tzitzis of our days. The tzitzis of their days, where they used to wear a beged, and the beged had tzitzis on it. It wasn't a beged of tzitzis. It wasn't like a beged that was deliberate for tzitzis. It was a beged that you wore, and you put tzitzis on it because it's b'chayv in tzitzis. So such a person would be dragging the tzitzis in basic forest. That would be like the Rosh if I say. We don't have that problem nowadays. Nobody's being nigra the tzitzis on a grave. But the Shulchan says that's not to make a difference. Since we now wear specialized begadim of tzitzis, it's still considered a leg l'rosh to walk around a basic verse with the tzitzis out. So therefore, you have to cover the tzitzis. This gets into the wider topic of covering your tzitzis, al pi Kabbalah, of having your tzitzis covered, wearing your tzitzis out. Mishnah Berurah, Aruch HaShulchan. Unfortunately, we haven't got the time. But what we do understand from this Gemara is the idea of leg l'rosh. I will end with one more thing. The Rabbi Soloveitchik in the Rishimis, Shiurim, Rabbi Soloveitchik has a following question. He asks, is it the idea of the leg l'rosh an idea that you're being mekayim the mitzvah in front of the mace? That's the leg l'rosh? Or is the leg l'rosh that you're holding a chayva shel mitzvah? Not an idea of you being mekayim a mitzvah. You're just walking around in a basic verse with a dvar mitzvah. Is that itself chayva shel mitzvah? Not, when you walk around the basic verse of the Sefer Torah, you're being mekayim any mitzvah with the Sefer Torah? No, you're just walking with the Sefer Torah. Not wearing tefillin. If you're walking, holding a sefer Torah, you're holding a tefillin. Not being mekayim it. That is leg l'rosh. Then means it's not just simply mekayim mitzvah in front of the mace that's being a leg l'rosh. It's even just holding a dvar mitzvah that's already leg l'rosh, right? And of course, being mekayim mitzvah would be leg l'rosh. But if you say the other way, that it's only being mekayim the mitzvah that's leg l'rosh, then maybe you would say it should be more meko on just carrying a dvar mitzvah in a basic varms. In the end of the day, one more point on leg l'rosh just to mention is the Ram Passim bring down halacha that in relation to saying Shema, you're not able to say Shema in Dalet Amos of a mace because of leg l'rosh, and even in basic verse, you're not yet in the mitzvah, says the Rambam, of Kriya Shema in a basic verse. How that works, we'll see later on the Gemara, is that necessarily according to all opinions. But from this, Rabbi Soloveitchik wants to prove that, at least according to the Rambam, it certainly is clear, at least from this side of the equation. It's not 100% clear because he also brings down this other aspect of holding the Sefer Torah, but we'll put that on the side. But clearly saying Shema is trying to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, that obviously Mekayim a mitzvah. It's not just a chevetz of a mitzvah, even being Mekayim a mitzvah, like saying Shema, could also have an aspect of leg l'rosh. So we end up with leg l'rosh is a situation, if you're talking divrei Torah, of saying Kriya Shema, of wearing tzitzis, of carrying a Sefer Torah, tefillin, all of that can be nichlal in leg l'rosh cheref haseh, and if we don't do it in front of a mace. Fine. The more later on is going to tell us they're in Yudches. They're like, oh, you're making fun of us? Where are you going to be tomorrow? You know, that you don't want to get that kind of klapish maya, bad vibes. Continues the Gemara. The David. So now we're going back to our point. We have already said from Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? Rabbi told us that David HaMelech got up chatzos halayla, and since it was Kidmei and Ashmaris, that was his proof that there are 4 Ashmaris in the night. But what we want to focus now is on the sleep patterns, the REM sleep of David HaMelech. Then he got up at chatzos. Says the Gemara, "B'David b'Palgo del'Elia havikoi." Did David HaMelech really get up in the middle of the night? Did he get up mamash at chatzos? Me'orta havikoi. It's not good enough. David HaMelech got up at chatzos. No, David HaMelech should get up mamash in the beginning of the evening, right? When did he have time to sleep? No, he's always busy learning. No, what do you mean? He was sleeping like the Gra, right? We're talking about a person who slept very few hours in the day. So the more is saying, David HaMelech didn't get up in the nighttime. David HaMelech got up in, he didn't get up at chatzos. He got up in the very early part of the evening. As I'm making is a bit of a joke, but the truth, he'd be told, is that's what we're getting it from. In other words, when people are saying, oh, the girl, he slept 2 hours, and this rabbi, he slept a half an hour. This is where it's coming from. We have Mamash Gemara discussing the sleep patterns of David HaMelech that don't think David HaMelech slept even until chatzos. He got up even earlier than that. He got up mamash in the beginning of the evening. In which case, then, when did he sleep? He didn't. Says the Gemara. David HaMelech says about himself, Kidamti b'neshef v'ashaveya. David HaMelech says, I got up by the neshef time in order to be able to praise the Rebbeinu Shalom. Says the Gemara, Umimai the high neshef or two. And how do you know that this neshef is really the evening? The pasuk b'ishan laila b'afel. The pasuk tells us b'neshef. One is the neshef be'erev yom when the sun sets. B'ishan laila b'afel at the time of the darkness. So therefore, what we see from here is the question that David HaMelech should not be seen as getting up by chatzos. He should be seen as getting up by the neshef, which is the beginning of the evening. So what do you now do? You have a steer in psukim. On the one hand, the pasuk tells us that David HaMelech got up chatzos laila akim l'cha. David HaMelech says I got up by chatzos. Another pasuk is saying kidamti b'neshef v'ashaveh. I got up by the neshef, which is the early evening. So you have a steer in psukim. What did David HaMelech sleep patterns actually look like? The Gemara answers like this: Amrav Aishia, Amrav Acha, Hachik, Amar David, Me'olam le'over alei chatzos laila b'shina. The truth is, David HaMelech sometimes got up earlier in the evening, sometimes he got up later in the evening, but he never got up past chatzos. Right? David HaMelech, the king of Klal Yisrael, had all the accoutrements of power, and nevertheless was the antithesis of laziness. He wouldn't even sleep past chatzos. Rabbi Zera Omar. Rabbi Zera says a different answer. What's Rabbi Zera's answer? Ad chatzos laila hayim misnamnim kisus. Rabbi Zera says that David HaMelech actually did sleep at night until chatzos, but he slept like a sus. A sus, you know this. They sleep standing, right? You know, like certain fish, like a dolphin. I think the dolphins are able to turn off one side of their head to go to sleep on one side of their brain, while the other side of the brain is awake, and then they can turn off the other side of the brain. So that's how they sleep. So the sus also has a very fascinating sleeping pattern. They can sleep deep REM sleep and like lie down, but they really only do that maybe for half an hour. They don't do it very, very long. Horses can sleep standing up. They're awake and they're sleeping. Like part of their brain is resting, and they're nevertheless still somewhat aware of danger. So when the Rebbe Zera is saying that David HaMelech slept like a sus, and after he get up like an Ari, it means that he was sort of halfway sleeping, right? Which is a little bit different than what Rabbi Ishia said. Rabbi Ishia said that David HaMelech sometimes got up early, and sometimes he would sleep later, but he would never sleep past chatzos. Rabbi Zera is saying no, he could have slept, but he never had really a full sleep. That was the way David HaMelech would sleep at night. Rav Ashi has a different approach. Rav Ashi says that until chatzos, when David was awake, he would be learning Torah, and after that, he would be engaged in shiras and tishbachas, in praises like the Tehillim for the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that's what it means. Look back in the pasuk, Chasos Laila Akimla Haides L'Chamish B'Teitzekecha. That's what it means. I would be getting up to be made to you on the righteousness and the greatness of your laws. That sounds like shiras for tishbachas, and that's what Rashi is trying to explain, that there was a difference in the learning pre-chatzos and post-chatzos. Pre-chatzos was regular learning. Post-chatzos was shiras and tishbachas was the Tehillim. Continues the Gemara. So what we had seen here is that Neshef is in the evening. Now the Gemara wants to challenge that basic proposition. Who said that Neshef means the evening? The Neshef, or tu fetimar ha Neshef tzafru. Neshef is in fact the morning. Nichsiv vayakim David me'an Neshef ada orev lemocharosam. The pasuk here, the context here is a very fascinating story in Shmuel. The story is as follows: David HaMelech had to run away from Shaul repeatedly. His father-in-law had some issues with him, and those issues ended up causing Shaul to Vatisachal of Rachra. He had a terrible Rachra, and he went to literally try to kill David, unfortunately, many times. And what we learn about about what had happened is that David Melech ran away to various places. Among the places that he ran to, in this case here at the end of Shaul's life, is the Pelishtim. This is going to be the fateful battle where Shaul loses his life to the Pelishtim in Emek Israel, and David he's staying with Achish Melech Gat. And Achish and David have been together now for a year, and Achish likes him very much. And at the big fateful battle against Shaul, the other Sarnei Pelishtim say, we don't want him. He's a turncoat. Send him back. What David would have done during the actual battle against Shaul, we can only presuppose. We have no idea what would have David done in the actual battle of Shaul against the Pelishtim. We don't know. It never happened. Because what happened was the other side of Pelishtim, remember, there's right? There's 5 Plishti cities, right? There's Ashkelon, Ekron, Gat, Aza, did I forget any? I'm forgetting maybe the 5th one. I'm not sure if I said Ashkelon. Ashdod. Right, so those are our 5 Plishti cities, and Achish, the king of Gat, Goliath is the Goliath Migat, right? Goliath comes from Gat. Kiryat Gat, you may have heard, is not exactly in that place, but it's an area not too far away from Gat. It's actually Gat is more inland than the 3 cities of Aza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. Those are mamash on the water, and then you have Ekron and Gat that are more inland. In any event, so what had happened is that David HaMelech is sent away by Achish. He says, look, I trust you like a brother. I know you'd be great on the war, but you got to go. The other people don't want you here. David comes back, and he's coming back to the town, and they find that their wives and their possessions and everything is gone. What had happened, it turns out there was a Mitzri kid they found who tells them that he was a slave to the Amaleki. The Amaleki were marauders. That was basically what they did. They used to come in and attack, pillage, and that's what they did here. And what practically that meant is that David HaMelech lost his wife, 2 wives, Achinoam and Israelis, and also the Avigail. They were taken along with all the possessions. They ended up going and getting them all back and fighting, and they had a big war. We ended up learning a big halacha from there about the people of Yoshev al Kalim, the people who stay home on the home front, as a topic for another discussion. End up splitting equally with the people who went to war. Also look in Parshas Matos, a long discussion. Anyhow, what we have over here is that David, the pasuk tells us, Akasha, V'neshef, or 2, is Neshef really in fact the evening, or Neshef Tzafru. Neshef is the morning. David went out to go fight against Amalekim, and he fought for them from Neshef until the Erev L'Macharosam. What is the Neshef that we're discussing? My love. Obviously, what we're talking about is Mitzafra V'ad Lelia. We're talking about from the morning until the evening of the next day. That's when David HaMelech fought them. Says the no, he fought them from the evening to the evening. We're talking about Neshef being the evening, not Neshef being the morning. So the then let's say the pasuk should say Neshef until Neshef. What does it mean? Neshef until the Erev. It sounds like it's 2 different types of time. If it was saying from the evening till the evening, it should have said Me'erev ad Erev. You know what the answer is? There's 2 different types of Neshef. Neshef Lelia Vasi Mama. There's a type of Neshef which is the evening and then the day comes. Neshef Yamama Vasi Lelia. And there's a type of Neshef which is in the day and then the night comes. So there's no problem as to what we say when David HaMelech says B'Neshef Be'erevim B'Isha and Laila V'Afela, that David HaMelech is saying that he's Kedamti B'Neshef, that he's getting up V'Ashaveh, he's getting up in the nighttime to praise the Rebbeinu Shalom. It means not that he got up in the morning. We're not changing the sleep patterns of David to say that he got up in the morning. No, he got up in the middle of the night, and the Gemaras end up saying, yes, Neshef means the evening, and Neshef could mean the morning. Either way, it doesn't have an issue for us to sustain the idea that David HaMelech got up early in the middle of the evening, and what we end up with is different conclusions as to how early he got up. But either way, everyone agrees David HaMelech got up in the night. Neshef here means the evening. It certainly does not mean the day. It wouldn't be a praise to David to say that he got up in the morning. There'll be no kunz. Everybody gets up in the morning. Kings, maybe they sleep a little bit late. Now we're not praising David for that. Especially when we have a pasuk where David says about himself, but David says, I get up in the middle of Chatzais. So obviously to say that Kidamti Beneshef, that he's getting up in the morning would be a contradiction. That's not a big chiddush. She's getting up in the middle of the night. And so Kidamti Beneshef is going to fit in with the idea of Chatzais Laila Akim L'cham. Okay, continues the Gemara. Says the Gemara, you're telling me that David got up at the Chatzais. How did he know when Chatzais was? Hashta Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know when Chatzais was, because if you remember, what did the pasuk say in Parshas Boy when he warns Parah? He says Kachatzais Laila Ani Yisei B'Tzarech Mitzrayim. And then we have the pasuk later on, but actual Makkos B'charis. Then the pasuk says Vahi B'Chatzais Laila of Hashem Hika Kol B'Char Be'eretz Mitzrayim. But Moshe Rabbeinu said Kachatzais. But when it actually happens, the Torah says B'Chatzais. So if Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't know when Chatzais is, so how could you say that David HaMelech would know when Chatzais is? So Hashti Moshe Rabbeinu have you the Siv Kachatzais Alailani Yosef B'Tzarech Mitzrayim Mai Kachatzais Ilim Dam Lekutcha Brichu Kachatzais. If you're going to say that, what that means is that the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling David HaMelech that he is going to come at around Chatzais, Miika svega kapi shmaya. Are you going to say that there was some sort of a suffix regarding the Rebbeinu Shalom? He doesn't know exactly what chatzos is. No, of course he knew. El Amar like bachatzos. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, "I'm coming at chatzos." And Moshe Rabbeinu came along Misfaras in his own way and said, and he's the one who added in kachatzos and didn't say bachatzos. So you see that it was not clear to Moshe Rabbeinu when chatzos was exactly. But David have a yada. How could David possibly know when chatzos was? Obviously, for us today, we all know when chatzos is. We have a watch. But in those days, they didn't have that kind of a technology. So therefore, since there was no difference in the technology between Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech, so how could David know if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know? The Gemara says, you know what? David was not a bigger tzaddik than Moshe Rabbeinu, but he had a siman. David had a special siman that told him when chatzos was. Rav Akabar business Rav Shimon Chasida. Rav Akabar business says the name of Shimon Chasida. There are people who get the appellation Chassan and Shas. Later on in Brachot, we're going to have Salah Chasida, we have Amma Chasida, and the Kedushin. People, they lived a certain life of Chasidus, Chasidim, or Shimon, we're going to see later on in Brachot also. So Shimon Chasida said the following: there was a harp that was suspended above the bed of David HaMelech, and when the time of Chatzos would come, there would come a north wind. Rashi explains that there are 4 winds, and the north wind would blow at the time of Chatzos, and it would blow the harp, and the harp would start playing a song. So miyad hayaymed va'isik b'Torah ad shalom and hashachar, and then David would get up and be isik in Torah. What do you mean isik b'Torah? Didn't we say it was shears with this brachos? I'm not sure, but essentially David would get up and go on with the evening and be engaged in Torah, study ad shalom and hashachar until the morning would come along. Now the Gemara adds in, I can't imagine this took place every day, but the Gemara says that at least one time it happened. When Alois came along, the rabbis came into David HaMelech. They said, "My master the king, the nation of Israel, they require sustenance." They said, "So do business. Let's relax regulations. Let the business grow." So they said, "No. You can't give a lion a little bit of food and say, here's a kamitza worth of food. The lion's not going to be okay with a little small portion. He's very hungry." A bar does not get filled up from the chulia. What does it mean? According to Rashi, it means that when you dig out a bar, you ever notice this, right? When you dig out a bar, and then you put back the earth that you took out of the bar, does it fill up the bar? No, it never fills it up exactly, right? So that's Rashi's chat. Taisa says no. Taisa says it's an idea that if you made a bar, it's not going to get filled up with rainwater. You have to pipe in water in order to get it filled up. Then the Rig gives another pshat, but that's a pshat of Rabbeinu Tam. Anyhow, the Gemara is saying essentially that the Chacham said to David HaMelech, we can't just simply do business and energize the economy and we'll be self-sustaining. There's not enough raw material. There's not enough goods. There's not enough money going around. So David said, okay. So Amar Lahem, let's go fight a war. That is always the answer. Right? This is called the tail wagging the dog. You go fight a war and you'll be able to get raw material, you'll be able to get labor, free labor, you'll get all the things that you need. The wartime economy maybe hurts the economy, but in the end, there's always a big rebound and it helps. So David says, let's go fight some wars. So they went to go get advice of Achitophel. Obviously, that's before Achitophel got very upset, as Chazal tell us, because of what David did with Bathsheba. Achitophel was her grandfather, and then he went and died. And he went on the side of the of Avshalom. And they get the advice of the Sanhedrin, and they went and go ask the Urim V'Tumim, so how to go fight the war. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Mike Pro, what is the pasuk saying? The Divrei Yomim Ba'acharei Achitophel ben Nayo ben Yayad Rav Yasar v'Sar Tzov l'Melech Yayav. That after Achitophel was ben Yo ben Yayada and Rav Yasar, right? Rav Yasar was the Kohen. The Tzar Tzov l'Melech Yayav, and the Tzar Tzov of David HaMelech was Yayav again. Before he also had a falling out with David, a separate topic, not for now. So Achitophel said, yes, Achitophel was the advisor of David, but the pasuk tells us, asking Achitophel was like asking God. It was the same like asking the Lord V'Tumim. He was just unbelievable. He had incredible advice. Again, his advice wasn't listened to by Avshalom, and therefore he goes to his home and he kills himself. That was potentially his punishment. Also, the Gemara says about in the end of Bacchus about when a Talmid Chacham goes there, his words that even if it was al piyat panai, and that was the situation there where David HaMelech was saying something that if somebody's not going to tell him if he's allowed to write the Shema Mefarish when he was trying to build out the foundations for the Beis Hamikdash, and it was threatening the waters of the Tohem were going to come up. So David HaMelech was needing advice. So Achitophel gave him the advice. In the end, nevertheless, he still died. Continues the Gemara. The Gemara says Benio ben Yoyada, who was that? Zeh Sanhedrin. He was the Sanhedrin. And Avyasar Elu Urim V'Tum, and Avyasar was the Urim V'Tum. Chenoram Benio ben Yoyada al Kresi Val Plesi, V'Lom Nikma Shrom Kresi Plesi. Why was it called the Kresi Plesi? Shekarsim Devrim Plesi Shemaflom Devrim, because the words cut through, and Plesi is that the words were unbelievable. After the general was Yair, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Adav, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Rav Idi, my Kra. What did the pasuk mean when he said that the kinar was hanging over David's head and it would wake him up because the north wind would blow? Because the pasuk says Ura kavodi Ura nevel v'chinar Ura ira shachan. The pasuk says, "Awake my honor." Ura hanevel v'chinar, let the lyre and the kinar wake me up. Or ira shachan, I wake up the morning. Other kings get woken up. I wake up the morning. We'll just finish one quick var in the pasuk. The pasuk tells us about the war of the 4 kings and against the 5 kings. When I was a little kid, I used to think that the 5 kings should be winning, and the 4 kings is like Robin Hood. The small guys are going to win. No, as the Ramban notes, the 5 kings are kings of little tiny city-states, but the 4 kings are kings of massive empires, and that's why it was easy to understand how the 4 kings were controlling the 5 kings and came to fight them. Have a wonderful day.